Most people cry when they get fired after 20 years of service. I didn't shed a tear. I just checked my watch. My new boss, a 28-year-old MBA named Caleb, thought he was simply escorting a legacy obstacle out of the building to save money. He didn't realize that by firing me, he was actually walking the only safety manual for his $50 million facility out the door. He called me dead weight. He was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't the dead weight. I was the brakes on a train he just decided to run at full speed. Before I tell you how I ignored "Do Not Touch" sticker turned a data center into a pressure cooker, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had a boss who thought they knew better than the laws of physics, hit that subscribe button. You're going to love this part. My name is Margot Vance, and for the last 22 years, I have been the lead infrastructure architect for Aegis Vault, the largest and most secure biogenetic storage facility in the Pacific Northwest, a role that required me to be invisible, precise, and absolutely intolerant of error. I am not the kind of person who makes a scene. I am the kind of person who reads the fine print, which is why, at 4:55 p.m. on a humid Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, watching a 29-year-old man named Caleb destroy his own career, though he didn't know it yet. Caleb was our newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, a man who wore suits that were too tight and used words like synergy and disruption as if they were magical incantations that could rewrite the laws of thermodynamics. He was currently explaining to me, with a patronizing smile that displayed perfectly whitened teeth, why my employment was being terminated effective immediately. He didn't use the word fired. He used phrases like strategic realignment and trimming legacy debt. He told me that my insistence on redundant safety protocols was slowing down the velocity of innovation and that the company needed to pivot to a leaner, more agile operational model. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't defend my record. I didn't point out that the legacy debt he was trimming was actually the complex thermal management system keeping $50 million worth of frozen DNA samples from turning into expensive sludge. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to the hum of the building's air filtration system, feeling the cold, hard weight of the master security key in my pocket. When he finally finished his monologue, checking his smartwatch as if he had a dinner reservation to get to, I stood up slowly. The silence in the room was heavy, smelling faintly of the ozone from the server room air purifiers and Caleb's expensive, musky cologne. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my lanyard. The plastic ID card was scratched and worn, the edges softened by 2 decades of use, a physical artifact of thousands of early mornings and late nights. I placed it gently on his glass desk. Next to it, I placed the master encryption key, a heavy, silver USB drive that contained the administrative root access for the entire facility's environmental controls. Caleb's eyes lit up. He reached for the key immediately, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He saw it as a scepter of power. He had no idea it was actually the safety pin of a grenade. He looked at me, expecting a fight, perhaps waiting for me to raise my voice so he could call security and feel justified in his decision. Instead, I walked over to the large wall of monitors behind his desk, which displayed the live telemetry of the server floor below us. The screen showed the heart of Aegis Vault, the immersion room. Unlike traditional data centers that use noisy fans to blow air over hot components, our servers were submerged in great, glowing glass tanks filled with dielectric fluid, a specialized mineral oil that absorbs heat without conducting electricity. It is silent, efficient, and beautiful. It is also dangerous if you don't respect the physics. I pointed to a small, yellow adhesive label I had placed on the bottom corner of the main control touch panel earlier that week. It was a simple, ugly label from a label maker, contrasting sharply with the sleek aesthetics of the office. It read, "Warning. Load balancing must remain automatic. Do not manually override." Caleb swiveled in his chair, following my finger. He looked at the label, then looked at me with a smirk of pure condescension. He stood up, walked to the panel, and with a theatrical flourish, he peeled the sticker off the glass. He balled it up in his fist and tossed it into the wastebasket. He told me that he didn't need a sticker to tell him how to run his machines, and that the new consultant, Trent, had assured him the system could handle manual inputs just fine. By removing that label, Caleb hadn't just cleaned up the decor, he had removed the institutional memory of the building. He had silenced the warning. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded, picked up my purse, and walked out of the office, leaving him alone with a system that was now deaf, dumb, and blind to the danger he was about to introduce. The walk to the parking lot felt like moving through a dream. The office was buzzing with the low-level energy of the end of the work week. I passed the break room where younger engineers were laughing over coffee, completely unaware that the woman who ensured the air they breathed was scrubbed and the floor they walked on didn't vibrate, was leaving for the last time. I passed Ravi, a junior systems administrator who was one of the few people in the building who actually read the technical documentation. He looked up from his desk, seeing the box of personal items in my arms, just a framed photo of my late husband and a small succulent. His eyes went wide. He started to stand up, opening his mouth to ask what was happening. I caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. "Don't," I signaled. "Don't associate yourself with the sinking ship." He hesitated, then slowly sat back down, looking terrified. He knew. He knew that without me, the delicate balance of the immersion tanks was vulnerable. I walked out the double glass doors, feeling the humid heat of the afternoon hit me. It was a stark contrast to the climate-controlled sterility of the vault. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, the leather cracked and comfortable, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I checked my watch. It was 5:15 p.m. The weekend had begun. And for the first time in 22 years, the safety of the vault was not my problem. Saturday morning was bright and clear, the kind of day that usually made me feel guilty for being indoors. Normally, I would be remotely monitoring the weekly pressure tests from my home office. Instead, I was in my garden, wearing thick canvas gloves, pruning my rose bushes with surgical precision. There is a brutal honesty to gardening. You cut away the dead wood to let the plant survive. It was a metaphor I couldn't escape as I snipped the thorny stems. My mind kept drifting back to the facility, to Caleb and his consultant, Trent. I knew Trent from industry conferences. He was a salesman disguised as an engineer, a man who worked for GridLogic, a firm notorious for cutting costs by ignoring safety margins. I knew exactly what they were planning. They wanted to overclock the servers. They wanted to increase the voltage to the processors to make them run faster, to process more genetic data in less time, to show the board of directors a beautiful, upward trending graph on Monday morning. In a normal data center, overclocking makes the fans spin faster. It gets loud. But in our immersion facility, physics works differently. When the dielectric fluid absorbs heat, it expands. It takes up more space. We had massive external reservoirs to handle this expansion, controlled by the automated load balancing software. But Caleb had called that software bloatware. He wanted to strip it out. He wanted to run the system manually, to squeeze every ounce of performance out of the chips. I snipped a rose branch, with a sharp crack. Without the automation, when the fluid heated up, the valves wouldn't open. The fluid would expand inside the sealed glass tanks. The pressure would build. It would be a slow, silent accumulation of force. I spent the afternoon organizing my garage, channeling my nervous energy into physical labor. I found myself checking my phone out of habit, expecting the automated alerts. Pressure warning, tank 4. But the phone was silent. They had disabled the alerts. They had turned off the fire alarm so they could smoke in the bedroom. Sunday was harder. The silence of the phone began to feel heavy. I sat on my patio with a glass of iced tea, staring at the screen of my personal tablet. I couldn't log into the corporate network. That would be a felony. And I wasn't going to give Caleb the satisfaction of arresting me. But I didn't need to log in to see what was happening. Years ago, I had set up a passive monitoring dashboard, a simple script that scraped public data from the facility's external power meter and the municipal water usage logs. It was a ghost dashboard, a way to see the building's vitals from the outside. The numbers told a terrifying story. The power consumption was creeping up, hour by hour. It wasn't the fluctuating rhythm of normal traffic, it was a steady, relentless climb. They were testing the overclock. They were ramping up the voltage. And the water usage, the water used to cool the secondary heat exchangers, was flat. That was the smoking gun. They were pouring energy into the system, but they weren't taking the heat out fast enough. The thermal inertia was building. The building was getting a fever. I watched the numbers until the sun went down, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It wasn't anger anymore. It was the sickening anticipation of a train crash you are powerless to stop. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind, imagining the sound of the pumps in the basement of the vault, straining against the closed valves. Monday morning arrived with the deceptive calm of a blue sky. I woke up at 6 a.m., made a pot of Earl Grey tea, and sat at my kitchen island. I set my tablet up against the fruit bowl, maximizing the browser window that showed my ghost dashboard. Today was the day. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Caleb was going to present his new era of efficiency. He was going to show Silas Thorne, the CEO, and the investors how he had boosted performance by 20% in just one weekend. I took a sip of tea and waited. At 8:55 a.m., the power metrics spiked vertical. They had engaged the full overclock. The presentation had begun. I closed my eyes and visualized the scene. The observation deck would be frigid, air-conditioned to an uncomfortable chill to keep the executives awake. Silas Thorne would be sitting at the head of the table, his face unreadable, watching the wall of glass that looked down onto the server floor. Below them, the immersion room would be bathed in the soft, futuristic blue glow of the tank LEDs. It looked like science fiction. It looked clean. Caleb would be down on the floor, wearing a headset, pacing in front of Tank 4. Tank 4 was the showpiece, the largest unit, holding the most critical sequence data. Trent would be sitting at the control console, fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing warnings, forcing the clock speeds higher and higher. On my screen, the power graph turned red. They were pushing 120% of the rated capacity. The heat generation inside those tanks would be immense. The chips were now hotter than boiling water, dumping that energy directly into the oil. The oil was expanding. I looked at the system heartbeat indicator on my dashboard. It flickered. That was the first sign of instability. The sensors inside the tank were beginning to fail. The heat was melting the shielding on the data cables. Down in the room, the beautiful silence of immersion cooling would be ending. Ravi, if he was smart, would be standing near the emergency exit. He would be the first to see it. In the clear oil of Tank 4, tiny bubbles would start to form on the surface of the server blades. Nucleate boiling. It looks like champagne rising. It's mesmerizing, but in a sealed hydraulic system, it's catastrophic. The bubbles take up volume. They add pressure to a system that is already full. I watched the clock. 9:12 a.m. 12 minutes of overclocking. The pressure inside Tank 4 would be approaching the structural limit of the polycarbonate lid. The bolts holding the lid down would be groaning, the metal stretching microscopically. The thick glass walls would be bowing outward, imperceptibly at first, then visibly vibrating. Caleb wouldn't hear it. He would be talking over the noise, his voice amplified by the headset, bragging about the numbers. "Look at the throughput," he would be saying. "We've eliminated the bottlenecks." He didn't realize that the bottleneck he eliminated was the safety valve that kept the building from exploding. Trent, staring at his rigged dashboard, would only see green lights. He had probably hard-coded the sensors to report normal until the very moment of failure. They were flying a plane into a mountain, and they had taped a picture of a clear blue sky over the windshield. Then, it happened. My dashboard froze. The data stream from the external power meter dropped to 0, then spiked to a chaotic, impossible number. A second later, the public safety scanner app on my phone chirped. "Automatic fire alarm, Aegis Vault Sector 4. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The rupture. It wouldn't have been an explosion of fire, it was a pressure burst. The seal on Tank 4 had failed. I could imagine the sound, a deafening wet crack like a gunshot, echoing through the concrete hall. The superheated dielectric fluid, pressurized to 20 psi, would have sprayed out in a violent, high-velocity jet. It would hit the ceiling, the walls, the glass of the observation deck. Upon hitting the cooler air of the room, the hot oil would instantly vaporize into a thick, white chemical fog. Within seconds, the visibility on the server floor would drop to 0. The blue lights of the tanks would be swallowed by the opaque mist. The investors in the deck above would jump from their seats. They would see their visionary COO disappear into a cloud of white vapor. And then, the secondary systems kicked in. My tablet pinged again. The status code changed to BIO hazard lockdown. The building's logic controller, detecting a massive drop in tank pressure and a spike in humidity, assumed the worst. A biological containment breach. It didn't know it was just oil. It thought the genetic samples were airborne. The blast doors to the server room slammed shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a thunderous clank. The ventilation dampers closed to seal the room. Caleb, Trent, and anyone else on that floor were now trapped. They were sealed inside a glass box filled with blinding, hot chemical fog, with the floor slick as ice, and the temperature rising rapidly as the remaining servers continued to cook the room. They were locked in with the monster they had created. And the only key, the digital authentication token required to override the lockdown, was on the USB drive I had left on Caleb's desk. The desk that was now empty, because Caleb was downstairs, banging on the glass of the blast doors. I took a sip of my tea. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I picked up my phone and set it on the counter, screen up. I watched the seconds tick by on the digital clock. 9:15 a.m. They would be panicking now. Caleb would be realizing that his cell phone had no signal inside the shielded server room. Silas Thorne, safe in the observation deck, but watching his $50 million investment turn into a steam room, would be the one to make the call. He was a pragmatist. He knew that physics didn't negotiate, and he knew who held the other set of keys. The phone rang. The screen lit up with the name Silas Thorne, CEO. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. A harsh, digital intrusion. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I wasn't playing hard to get. I was letting the reality of their situation sink in. I wanted them to understand that the legacy debt they had fired was actually the only asset that mattered. I picked up the phone, swiped to answer, and brought it to my ear. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask what was wrong. I simply said, in a voice as calm as the dead of winter, "This is Margot. My consulting rate is $5,000 an hour, with a 4-hour minimum. Do you have a pen? $5,000 an hour is not a consulting fee, Margot. It is a ransom demand." Silas Thorne's voice did not crackle this time. It growled, low and dangerous, vibrating through the speaker of my phone with the specific frequency of a man who is watching his legacy dissolve into white mist. The background noise on his end was a cacophony of destruction. The relentless, piercing whoop of the facility's strobe alarms, the muffled, incoherent screaming of board members terrified by the shaking glass, and the guttural thuds of bodies slamming against the reinforced doors of the server room. "You are holding my son hostage inside a pressurized bomb that you built," he accused, his voice thick with the desperation of a father masked by the aggression of a CEO. "Correction, Silas," I replied, leaning back against the granite countertop of my kitchen island, watching a single drop of condensation slide down the side of my cold tea mug. "I did not build the bomb. I built the safety valve that prevented the bomb from detonating. Your son is the one who dismantled it because he thought it looked ugly on the dashboard. And I am not holding anyone hostage. The laws of thermodynamics are holding them hostage. I am simply the only person in this hemisphere who speaks the language of the captor." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, heavy and expensive. "Based on the last telemetry packet I received before your sensors melted, the ambient temperature in that room is rising by 2 degrees every 45 seconds. The fluid is essentially becoming a deep fryer. You can debate the morality of my fee, or you can wire the retainer. You have roughly 4 minutes before the heat causes Caleb to lose consciousness. Once he passes out and slides face first into the oil, the aspiration risk becomes fatal." There was a noise on the other end, a sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of a fist hitting a table. Silas was a predator, but he was currently trapped in a cage of his own making. He knew the math. He knew the liability. "Fine," he spat, the words sounding like broken glass. "I am authorizing the wire. $20,000. It is sent. I am looking at the confirmation. Now, get him out of there before I send a SWAT team to break down the door." "Do not let anyone touch those doors," I ordered, my voice shifting instantly from negotiator to field commander. The banking notification chimed on my tablet. a cheerful melodic sound that signaled the shift in power. If you breach the seal externally while the room is under positive pressure, you will cause an explosive decompression event. The door will not just open, it will become a projectile. You will kill everyone standing in the corridor. I am patching into the public address system now. Tell the board to step back from the observation window. If they keep pounding on it, the acoustic vibration combined with the internal pressure will shatter the glass. I assume you don't want to explain to the shareholders why they are covered in hot mineral oil. I tap the command sequence into my tablet, bridging my cellular signal to the facility's master communication grid. The connection hummed to life. My voice, amplified by the high-fidelity speakers embedded in the ceiling of the server room, boomed into the white void, cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "This is Margot Vance. Stop screaming. Sit down. And listen to me very carefully." The effect was instantaneous. The chaotic, animalistic shouting from the audio feed died down, replaced by the ragged, wet coughing of three men trapped in a white hell. "You are currently inside a biohazard level 4 containment field. The white fog you are breathing is vaporized dielectric mineral oil. It is not toxic, but it is heavy. It coats the alveoli in your lungs. If you continue to hyperventilate, you will asphyxiate. Regulate your breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Do not swallow the condensate." "Margot!" Caleb's voice tore through the intercom, a high-pitched wail of pure terror that stripped away every layer of his corporate persona. "I can't see. It's everywhere. It's burning my eyes. The door won't open." I pulled the lever. I pulled it so hard the handle bent, but it's jammed. "You locked us in. You did this." "It is not jammed, Caleb," I said, keeping my tone as cold and level as a flatline. "You are experiencing the physics of positive pressure. The room has sealed itself and pressurized to keep potential biological contaminants inside. Think of the room as an overinflated tire. The door opens inward. You cannot pull it open against 2 atmospheres of pressure. You are not locked in. You are being preserved. And you are the one who removed the automated relief valve that would have vented this pressure safely because you wanted to save 3 milliseconds of latency." "I don't care about latency!" Trent, the consultant, shrieked in the background. His voice was bubbling, wet with fluid. "My skin. It feels like it's on fire. Is it acid? Did the batteries rupture?" "It is thermal irritation," I corrected him, glancing at the peripheral heat sensors on my dashboard, which were still intermittently reporting. "The fluid temperature is approaching 85 degrees Celsius. You are essentially standing in a slow cooker. And you, Caleb, are going to fix it manually. This is an operations issue. You wanted to be hands-on? This is your chance." "I can't do anything!" Caleb sobbed. "I can't see my own hands." "You don't need to see," I commanded. "You need to feel. You need to crawl. Do not try to stand up. The floor is frictionless oil on polished concrete. If you fall, you will crack your skull. Get on your hands and knees. You need to move to the center of the aisle, exactly 3 meters in front of the ruins of Tank 4. "I don't know where that is," Caleb cried. "I'm disoriented." "Find the floor tile with the tactile warning bumps," I said, closing my eyes and visualizing the room I had designed. "It is a diamond plate texture steel tile. You tripped over it last week during your inspection and complained that it was ugly, that it ruined the sleek aesthetic of the server farm. You told me to have it removed. I didn't. Find it. Your life depends on finding the friction you tried to eliminate." I listened to the sickening, wet sounds of expensive fabric dragging across oil-slicked concrete. It was a visceral, humiliating noise, the sound of a man literally crawling through the muck of his own incompetence. I think I found it," Caleb gasped after a painful minute. "It's rough. It scraped my knee." "Good," I said. "Now, this is the hard part. That tile is heavy. It is suctioned down by the oil. You won't be able to lift it with your fingers. You need leverage. Take off your belt. Use the buckle as a pry bar. Jam it into the seam and leverage it up." I heard the fumbling of wet leather, the clinking of metal on metal. "It's stuck," Caleb grunted. "It's heavy." "It is heavy because it is real steel, Caleb," I said. "Put your back into it. Pull." There was a shout of exertion, a scraping of metal, and then the heavy clang of the tile flipping over onto the wet floor. "Okay," Caleb panted, sounding on the verge of collapse. It's open. There's a hole. It's dark. Reach inside, I instructed. You will feel a cold iron wheel, about 6 inches in diameter. It is the manual override for the atmospheric dump. It is an analog failsafe from the 1990 seconds. The exact kind of legacy tech you wanted to scrap because it wasn't connected to the cloud. Grab the wheel. I have it, he whispered. It's greasy. Turn it counterclockwise, I said. But listen to me, Caleb. This is critical. Do not yank it. If you open that valve fully, the pressure will drop instantly. The sudden vacuum will cause the glass observation window above you to implode. You will be showered with thousands of pounds of tempered glass shards. You need to turn it slowly. You are the load balancer now. Turn it 1/4 turn. Wait for the hiss. I heard the groan of rusted metal, a screech of protest from a mechanical part that hadn't moved in 10 years. Then, a sharp, piercing hiss cut through the audio feed like a jet engine starting up. Stop! I shouted. Hold it there! Let the room bleed. The hissing was steady, a controlled scream of escaping gas. On my ghost dashboard, the pressure numbers began to tick down. 18 pounds per square inches. 16 pounds per square inches. 14 pounds per square inches. The fog. It's moving, Caleb whispered, awe replacing the terror in his voice. It's swirling up toward the vents. That is the emergency exhaust system kicking in, I explained. The pressure is normalizing. The magnetic locks on the doors will disengage in 10 seconds. When they do, crawl to the hallway. Do not try to run. And Caleb? Leave the valve open. The system needs to breathe. Do not try to optimize the airflow. The sound of the magnetic locks disengaging was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. A heavy metallic thud, followed by the rush of fresh air. You are clear, I told Silas on the other line, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Your son is alive. Your data is cooked, but retrievable. My contract is fulfilled. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. The silence that rushed back into my kitchen was profound. My hands, which had been steady as stone throughout the ordeal, trembled slightly as I picked up my tea. It was stone cold. I poured it down the sink and watched the brown liquid swirl away, thinking about the millions of dollars of damage swirling down the drain 5 miles away. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. When I arrived at the facility the next morning, reinstated as the Executive Director of Infrastructure Remediation with a contract that gave me absolute autonomy and triple my previous salary, the lobby was silent. The receptionist handed me a new badge, black, all access without making eye contact. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than the old one. I took the elevator to the observation deck. Silas was there, staring down at the server floor. Below, the scene was apocalyptic. A hazmat crew in yellow Tyvek suits was squeegeeing gallons of viscous, shimmering oil into recovery drums. The smell was overpowering. A nauseating mix of burnt plastic, ozone, and hot mineral oil. Tank 4 was a jagged ruin of twisted metal and broken glass. But in the corner of the boardroom, huddled in a blanket, was Caleb. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing ill-fitting sweatpants and a company t-shirt. But the most shocking change was his head. It was shaved down to the skin, gleaming pale under the fluorescent lights. Patches of his scalp were red and inflamed. The oil, Silas said, seeing my gaze. His voice was hollow. It reacted with the heat. It caused severe contact dermatitis. The doctors said the hair was matted with chemical residue. They had to shave it all off to treat the burns. I walked over to the table and slid a document across the mahogany surface. I didn't sit down. The remediation contract, I said. It gives me full hiring and firing power. It doubles the budget for preventative maintenance. And it mandates that Caleb is reassigned. Silas looked up, his eyes tired. Reassigned? I thought you would demand I fire him. No, I said, looking at the young man who was staring blankly at the floor. If you fire him, he learns nothing. He goes to another company and breaks something else. I want him reassigned to the archives department in the sub-basement. For a minimum of 2 years, his job will be manual data entry, logging the tape backups, handwriting the inventory labels. No decision-making power regarding infrastructure. No agile pivots, just friction. Silas looked at the document, then at his son, then at the ruin of his server room below. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. He signed it with a pen that scratched loudly in the quiet room. I walked over to Caleb. He flinched when I approached, as if expecting me to strike him. I didn't. I simply looked at his bandaged hands, cut by the floor tile he had been forced to lift. "You learned a hard lesson yesterday, Caleb," I said softly. "Physics doesn't care about your job title. It doesn't care about your quarterly goals or your buzzwords. It only respects the rules." I reached into my bag and pulled out a new label maker. I printed a fresh sticker, bright yellow and black. I walked to the control panel where this all started, the panel he had peeled my warning off of. I cleaned the glass with a sanitizing wipe, peeled off the backing of the new label, and smoothed it firmly onto the surface. Warning: automatic systems. Do not touch. Penalty for removal. Termination. I turned back to them, the hum of the building finally sounding right again. The deep, steady thrum of the backup chillers kicking in, regulating the temperature, respecting the limits. "Now," I said, checking my watch, "if you'll excuse me, I have a mess to clean up, and Ravi is waiting for me to approve the new pressure valves." I walked out of the room, leaving them in the silence of their own making, and headed down to the floor, where the real work, the work of keeping the world running, was waiting for me. Sometimes, the most powerful move isn't a scream, it's absolute silence. Margot proved that you don't always need to fight to establish your worth sometimes. You just need to step aside and let the consequences do the talking. True competence is often the invisible safety net. And it is only when it's gone that people realize how high they were flying without a parachute. If you've ever been the quiet force holding a chaotic workplace together, or if you've ever had to walk away to finally be heard, you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, drop a comment with your own experience, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.